I know. I'm just gonna stop saying that because it has been a long time, and I am for the first time attempting to record while everybody's in the house. And you know I don't edit, so what you see and what you hear is what you get. You might have a little 9-year old come streak across this room, or you might start hearing blues music from my husband blaring. So this is raw. This is real. Hello, if you have not joined me, my name is Dr. Isha Ducree. I am a Black feminist geography professor, and I like to talk about the link between Black women, Black power, and space. And so happy that you're here to join me. And I'm kind of ripping from the headlines today to talk about how you may be reacting to the recent decision about University of Michigan's regents deciding to ban diversity statements in hiring, and this general kind of environment of institutions, corporations rolling back DEI. First, I want to tell you, do not clutch your pearls about DEI. And I have kind of two to three reasons why there's no reason to clutch your pearls, particularly when we're going to have a whole host of things thrown at us in the next 4 years. And I hope I can give you more hope when I talk about the context of Michigan banning diversity statements and a rollback of major corporations in their DEI offices and officers. Um, I hope I can quell your anxiety if you have any and redirect your energy in the belief in the hope of a better future. I can't promise that it'll happen, nor do I predict that it will happen in the next couple of years. But I want to set a context of how to understand some of these changes. And again, keeping in mind place and power, geography in the midst, in Black agency in the midst of patriarchy and in the midst of white supremacy. Okay, so I got my notes here, and I don't want to make this as long as last time, try to keep it down. I want to give you 2 to 3 reasons, because some is like an A and a B, 2 to 3 reasons why you should not clutch your pearls about Michigan's new stance and the rollback of DEI institutions. Okay? And before I start pontificating, can I ask that you please, please, please like this video, subscribe. You know, it's not a big commitment to subscribe because I certainly don't get them out very often. So please like the video, please subscribe. Send me a comment. Tell me, I'm sitting here hiding from my family and I don't know how these things are going over. So please say, I like what you said, Keisha. You made me think, Keisha. You're wrong, Keisha. Whatever, however you may feel. And if you think if you have a friend that would be interested in these discussions, maybe you talked about it over the holiday, then maybe you want to also share some of this content. So like, share, describe, comment. I want your feedback to see if, some of these things are resonating. So without further ado, let's talk about why you should not clutch your pearls over the DEI rollbacks. Okay, so I'm really responding to the idea about 2 weeks ago that the regents of the University of Michigan voted to remove the requirements that diversity statements were mandatory for those applying for positions or for those who were seeking promotion in at the University of Michigan, the system. Okay. And many people put that in line with the announcements by other places, John Deere or Walmart, about this, this rollback of DEI, that we've reached this moment where the conservative forces have now have demanded institutions not concentrate on inclusivity and inclusion as as a proponent in reaction to what we saw primarily in 2020 when after the murder of the recorded murder of George Floyd, when institutions were forced to confront racism and state and violence, and they were begrudgingly created these offices. Some institutions were earlier, but that's when you saw kind of a really visceral kind of universal reaction. So there was a reaction during that particular time. Companies, institutions created offices, officers, had it as a principle, and now we're seeing like this dialectical thing. If you believe in dialectical evolution, it's kind of a Marxian notion where there's this big force and then there's this counter force. So there was this force to understand and confront racism in our country. And now we're moving into kind of the effect, the boomerang, where now there are forces, the people who are in power are now forcing people to pull back from any kind of racial progress, in quotation marks. Don't clutch your pearls because it's dialectic. So, number one, why you shouldn't clutch your pearls. Look at my notes. Michigan is our test case for race. Okay, so in this context, place matters. So the fact that this happened in Michigan is actually really important because Michigan, the state itself, plays a huge role in terms of it's always been a place in the United States where there has been a very visible, I would say that, a very visible, a very political, a very social cauldron of race relations. It has always been. Michigan has been the site. So on the side of kind of racist forces, white supremacist forces, it's always been this. So, but also on the other side, this is kind of the 1A and the 1B. So the reason is, Michigan is a test case. 1A, Michigan is a test case because people who do want us all to go back to being barefoot, pregnant, and enslaved, they're always want to test those political and social theories in a place like Michigan. Michigan is receptive for white supremacist policies, okay? But 1B, why Michigan matters, is again, this opposing force. Michigan has the fiercest fighters for equality, inclusion. You're like, what? Yes, and this is what I'm going to prove. So let's talk about 1A. Let's talk about why Michigan and why it is a test case. And if you're old enough, if you're not, you may be clutching your pearls tighter. But if you're old enough, if you've been around, if you've been a Justice G for as long as I have, you recognize that Michigan is always the place where white supremacists and their enablers have tried to test the boundaries for whether something can be a national policy. So, not too long ago for some people, there was the Michigan Civil Rights Initiative, right? That sounds good, right? But the Michigan Civil Rights Initiative, which came out, I think, around the early 2000s, I want to say, is not like what it sounds. It was an anti-affirmative action policy. The creator of this policy, the name of Ward Connerly, had adopted a similar proposal and one in California. And so they then brought it to Michigan. So again, like I said, this is called the Civil Rights Initiative, but it was an anti-affirmative action policy. And the places that are more receptive for getting these policies, at least as discussion points, because there's some places in the U.S. where they like get that ish out of here. But in Michigan, it does make the legislative house and it gets discussed and fought over. And so this anti-affirmative action policy by Ward Connerly was introduced, and it was defeated. So these things are defeated, and then sometimes they're not. Everyone knows about the most recent case, anti-affirmative action case, went to the Supreme Court that really did roll back affirmative action, and that was brought on behalf of the same lawyers, conservative lawyers, on behalf of some Asian American students. But before that, one of the largest before that was a Michigan case, and there was a case brought up. So there was a Texas case. And then before that, there was a Michigan case. It was, oh my gosh, V. Bollinger. I know someone can correct me in the comment. I know it was Bollinger because at the time, Bollinger was the head of the University of Michigan. And so again, these things that are happening today, that big case that went before the Supreme Court, where you see the rollback of affirmative action programs, was tested literally 2 decades ago against a major university like Michigan, and really a case questioning the quota system, queer quotes, in admissions policy. So again, these are examples of let's try this ish out somewhere where we can get a receptive audience. And that place is Michigan. So we have the Michigan Civil Rights Initiative. We have the Bollinger anti-affirmative action case that comes out again in the early 2000s. When I lived there, I am a University of Michigan alum. That's why this is near and dear to my heart. Go Blue. When I lived there, do I really want to tell you when? 1990s, 2000, 2000s, early 2000s. The Michigan is itself as a state is a stronghold for militia movements. So people have heard about, if you haven't, Google search Michigan militia. There are a number of groups in Michigan, not that far from city centers. It's not like an hours and hours long drive. You've also may have seen during the campaign trail that y'all president had he had one of his rallies in a place called Howell, Michigan, which has a Klan museum. Yeah. By the way, I taught in Howell, Michigan, and everyone was like, don't go there, don't stop, don't get gas. And I live to tell the story. But Michigan is known to have not only just, racist policies and white supremacists, but like armed racists, which is like a whole nother level. And I want to remind you, not too long ago, that we had a Secretary of Education from Michigan, Betsy DeVos, who was a rich benefactor to y'all's president. And she wanted to inflict a lot of damage to public education. And then not so distant that you remember in terms of environmental issues was the Flint water crisis. And people know that part of the story about the Flint water crisis, Flint, Michigan. They know that kids and everyone were poisoned by lead pipes. But the political part, the power part that came as a result of an environmental health problem was the issue of emergency managers. So really quickly, because I don't want this to be too long, what is important to understand is that there was a policy that when a municipality could not meet their budget, that the governor could appoint emergency managers. And the significance of that from a Democratic side is that the governor could appoint whoever he wanted to be representative of the people of that municipality, right? Completely anti-democratic action, where the person that you elected, your council members, your mayor, your district councilman, or whatever it is, they could be asked to step aside and you could be governed by someone that was appointed by the governor. And so before we got to the Flint water crisis, we created the situation for there to be one because the emergency manager who was appointed by the governor decided to cut costs by switching the water systems. So it doesn't begin with the switch with the it doesn't begin with the fact that there was lead. It begins as a purely political problem or political situation where the governor's buddies, cronies, are now responsible for the work of the elected officials, and there's literally no representation for the taxation of these people. So we know about Flint because of the water crisis, but we saw emergency managers in a city like Detroit. And when you begin to look at the places that were in such budget crisis to get emergency managers that were appointed by the governor, you realize that these places had quite a few people of color in them. So you literally had a Jim Crow system when you created emergency managers in the state of Michigan. So I want you to keep all that in mind when you see what's happening in Michigan, and to understand it as a test case and a model case for what happens, right? There's always this kind of assertion that takes place, this assertion of power, of white power, and that if it's going to happen, Michigan is going to be a test ground for it. Okay? So with that, I still don't want you to cut your clothes. You're like, oh my God, so this is how Michigan goes. Hold up, because 1B is that they fight back. Okay? Even though all these things happen in Michigan, even though, we have just dire circumstances like the Flint water crisis, and I didn't get to talk about, and I won't have time to talk about what happened in Bensonhurst and the atrocities there, and in Flint. What we do know is that Michigan, even though it has these tendency to entertain white supremacist ideas and concepts and policies, Michiganders, particular Black Michiganders, ain't here for the nonsense. And Michigan has a long and storied history of strong Black agency. Okay? So it has been where it has been a test ground for white supremacist notions. It has also been a fertile ground for Black liberation and human rights. Okay? So they don't sit down and take it. Okay? And they don't have the time to clutch their pearls. There is a vibrant, active community of activists working against the policies that infringe upon the rights of Michigan taxpayers, Black taxpayers, Michigan public school children, union workers. They're always fighting. And so I want to give you some examples of that, because I don't want this to be one-sided. I don't want you to clutch your pearls. So when I think about fighter, when I think about Michigan, I think of the late, great Grace Lee Boggs. If you don't know her, I will provide a link in the box. I had the pleasure of meeting her much later in her life in my work and as a student at Michigan. But she is just she was such a wonderful soul, and really embodied what it means in terms of the human rights advocacy in Michigan and in the peace and civil rights and peace world itself. You also have, I talked a little bit about Bensonhurst, which is, I can give you more. Bensonhurst it's a story unto itself. It's a beautiful place that waterways and gorges, and the Black people there have had to fight for the right to maintain this beautiful oasis among white supremacist forces that wanted to take it. And what we saw in the early 2000s as well, Bensonhurst was also put under emergency management, I'll tell you that. But there were riots when I lived there, and that was the first time I ever heard of it. So that we have peaceful protests, and we also have not so peaceful protests. We also can't forget the summer of 1967 in Detroit. Detroit in and of itself has a storied history. Let's not forget that Diego Rivera was invited to create these beautiful murals. The most recent thing would be for me, and I think the most amazing thing in Detroit was the creation of in beautiful urban gardens in the city of Detroit and the establishment of the Detroit Food Policy Council, which I still, in terms of food justice and environmental justice, have never seen such a community led, grassroots led policy organization that is recognized by the city. Just doing some great work in terms of EJ and addressing environmental conditions and looking at the impacts of children going to school and asthma rates. Really amazing work being done in Detroit in particular, but in other pockets of Michigan as well. So they're not clutching their pearls. They're putting in the work, and they have fought the white supremacist forces who want to take those rights away. So, reason 1A and 1B on why this is happening in Michigan and why it's in good hands. Then I want to talk about my last reason. So this is really reason number 2. Don't clutch your pearls. Because guess what? DEI is just performance anyway. I want you to sit with that. As it has manifested itself into institutions, companies, organizations, diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, is just performance. I'm not gonna say, and I can't because I actually was a DEI officer for 5 years for my own organization, and that's a whole nother. We ain't gonna go there. Maybe later, but it's performance because it doesn't have to be performance by the people who work there, okay? And it may not be for certain pockets of the organization merely performance. There are people who believe in it, in the transformational aspects of what it can do to take diversity and equity and inclusion seriously. But it was an add-on. Okay, so it was we're going to run our business. Oh my gosh, you guys are upset about what happened to George Floyd and the way it was handled. Let's hire somebody. Let's create an office. Let's create a nameplate, right? It was an added feature to an organization or institution. And whenever you take something that is fully built, it has full policies, and you create an office and a nameplate for it, it's marginalized. It's on the periphery. It's ghetto. Okay? It's ghetto. It sits over there. Oh, you got a problem with that? Go see her. Go over there. We're going to run the business as we've run the business. Okay? We're not going to look at our policies and figure out how can we be transformational, right? We're going to send you over there to work it out with them. We're going to create some statements. We're going to have a couple of dinners. And again, sometimes that's great. But the nature of structure and space in of itself, remember, I'm always approaching problems and solutions according to space. If you build an extension onto your house and you just build the structure, it don't have electricity, it's not insulated, it doesn't have a bathroom, you know what I'm saying? You just built a piece of the house. It might not be a fully livable piece. It might not be integrated, right? And so that's what it has manifested itself to be. It is manifested itself to be an appeaser. An appeaser. You guys are mad. We did something heinous or wrong. We're going to correct it by creating a nameplate and having some events. What you really want And maybe some organizations have done it. If you know, if you like, no, Keisha, that's not true because, I do work for this place and if you can, and I want to hear it, if you can tell me in the comments of a place where they created DEI and they said, before we hire anybody, we're going to do an audit of who's here, who stays, how people are promoted. We talk about our full scale of operations. We're going to examine those things to see if there is a disproportionality of those recipients. And we're going to talk and figure out how we can change the existing structure to make it more equitable. Call me. Write it down. Please tell me. Tell me of a place that you know where they said, we're going to take a mirror to ourselves first, and we are going to create structures. We're not hiring anybody new. We know we might hire a consulting firm to do the audit, but we are going to change the very policies to make our environment and our products more equitable and our service more equitable. That really didn't happen. They may have hired someone and told them to do it. But again, when you build an extension and you expect it to be livable, so I'm going to hire them to do the audit and to give us recommendations. That's no power. I gave tons of recommendations. Doesn't mean it's going to pass. And then they can hire, if you put your office over here and you run your organization right here, then you are still promoting the people who get to the top anyway. You're still hiring presidents to get to the top, head leaders to get to the top anyway. You're still rewarding the same people and the same things anyway. And that's not useful, right? As a matter of fact, as a form of appeasement, everyone seems to be really happy. And then they say it's in good hands and let's go somewhere else. So in that regard, a rollback of DEI, it doesn't mean very much. It doesn't, because there was never much there in the first place. So don't clutch your pearls. What you really want to see when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, again, and if you say if it exists, please tell me, because I want to study this organization. You want to see a fully integrated system in that structure, in that institution. You do not hire a nameplate and have days. You require everyone who has a leadership and administrative position to demonstrate and document and have professional development on the principles of diversity, equity, inclusion. It is a part of everybody's job description. It is embedded within the structure. It is not an add-on. It is not an extension. It is not an office. It is a principle upon which all things are vetted, evaluated, promoted, or let go. That's not ghetto. That's centering it and making sure it's the responsibility of everyone and not some overworked person who has an office and a staff of 3. Do I get an amen? So in that regards, it's not that big of a loss. What we were facing prior to 2020 or whenever someone created that office are the same problems. And it's not the fault of the DI professionals. I want to make that very clear. And again, I can make a whole series of videos about that because I did it. We weren't given the tools that we needed because it was like, do this, but don't change anything in the structure. So what we thought we had ended or minimized was never minimized. So a rollback is not that big a deal. So this is getting long. Where do we go from here? Okay, Keisha, you said don't clutch your pearls. Michigan does this. We fight back, and it wasn't ish anyway. Where do we go from here? I don't know. In short, I have a couple of ideas. Okay, I have a couple of ideas. based on what I said. So remember that Michigan is a test case. So it was tested here. If it works in Michigan, it will then it will move across. So if you're living in a place, I want you to become more active in local issues and state issues for the moment. Know who your reps are. Find out when your legislative days are for your state assemblies, and work with organizations that you feel comfortable with to begin to use those legislative days as really active days to talk about your agenda, because there's still room, and you have more power as a citizen unless you've been deemed a budget risk and the governor decides to appoint an emergency manager. But other than that, get involved in the local and state politics, and there are groups that have those chapters. So if it hasn't happened, know that it is on its way, because Michigan is a harbinger of conservative policies. Okay, so keep your eye out. Number two, related to They Fight Back, is to support your local organizations. Become a volunteer. It's a great time to volunteer, especially I'm on the board of a local nonprofit who gets a significant portion of its budget from the federal government. And we're looking at the incoming administration and we're just like, we are preparing for the storm. So whatever, if you can contribute monetarily, that's great. If you can volunteer, that's great. If you can do a kind of hosting of creative fundraisers, it's great. But we're all going to need your help. All of your reproductive rights organizations and your shelters and your food pantries and your libraries are all looking at their books at the end of the year and looking at the incoming administration and seeing that the safety net might get that much harder. They all need help. So again, work local when you can. They need you. And then unclutch pearls also means that to, pick your fights. I'm saying don't worry about this one. Just work local. But there's going to be a lot coming at us the next couple of years, and we just don't have the energy for all of these things. And so in that regard, to do that. And I wanted to say something else about DEI, but I can't remember what it is. So my action item is to find your local nonprofits and pick one to get on their volunteer list for whatever they have to do, because they sorely need your help. With facing what they know will be a growing number of people who will need their help, and a smaller purse from which to operate, particularly if they rely heavily on federal grants. So that's what you can do. And depending on the comments or the feedback, I can talk about DEI. And I think I've alluded to that DEI as an extension is useless and is appeasement, and that really asking more of the leaders in our organizations to be solid and versed in that is a good thing. So that's it. It's a little bit shorter. Sorry. But relax. Unclutch your pearls. Until next time. Bye.